Hello, students. So this screencast is intended to set you up to do a lab activity. Now, this activity is one that can be done in the lab, but during class. But for reasons that I think, will become apparent soon, it's hard to do. It's time consuming, and so in the past we haven't done this in the lab. So this has always been a paper pencil activity. And so it works just fine for our current e-learning setting. That said, it can be a little complicated and tricky, and so I would encourage you, if you have some classmates that you reach out to sometimes to do AP Bio with, maybe not a bad idea to set up a quick Google Meet and chat with them as you go through this and collaborate. So before we get rolling, if you go onto Schoology, all these files that I'm about to open are here under the Ecology folder, Lab Activities. And there's three things that you're going to want to open, all of which will also be linked in the assignment. The first one is the actual student handout. And so if you just open this, it's going to become apparent that you need some information. So when you get to part B, there's just not much information here. And so you're probably going to wonder, well, where do I get the information I need to answer these questions? For that, you're going to need to go to this other document, which is the instructions document, which is posted here. So the instructions document has background information that you're definitely going to want to read. It kind of tells you what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then gives you some numbers, gives you some questions to answer. Everything is here. The student handout is strictly just to put your answers down. So you're going to kind of want to work with these two documents in tandem. For the screencast, though, I want to start with the slideshow to just kind of give you some background that will be helpful for you. So this lab is called Energy Dynamics and Productivity. And spoiler alert, it involves Brussels sprouts and caterpillars. So what you're going to do is carry out a mathematical analysis of energy flow through an ecosystem, including an analysis of primary productivity, secondary productivity, and biomass. So before we dive in, just a kind of a basic fundamental question here. As a plant grows and gets larger, where does the additional mass come from? Now, this is actually kind of a common question that people ask to test misconceptions. As you think about this question, I hope you are going to tell me that the additional mass comes from carbon dioxide, because in the process of photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide and use it to build sugars, and those sugars are largely what makes up plant body mass. So the cell walls are made of cellulose, that's a sugar, and those sugars are made by photosynthesis. So really, photosynthesis, we're turning air into plant, which is pretty incredible. Carbon dioxide specifically into sugars. Sure, they also take in water and some other nutrients, but for the most part, it is the carbon dioxide where this additional biomass is coming from. And so what you're going to do is kind of play around with this and do some calculations around that idea. Well, how much carbon dioxide is being taken up and how efficient is that? So before we get into it, we need to just talk a little bit about energy in biomass in general. So in the instructions to that lab that you're all, I'm confident, are going to read, says that each gram of biomass is equivalent to 4.35 kilocalories of energy. And there's different numbers for different things. Where does that number come from? Well, maybe you recall, I think they still do this in chemistry, but in chemistry, perhaps, or maybe even middle school, you did a lab on calorimetry. And the setup for the lab is you take a piece of food, a Cheeto is popular, and you stab it onto a little pin stuck into a cork, and you suspend a can of water, and you set the Cheeto on fire. And you do this in some sort of insulating container to sort of keep that heat contained as much as possible. So as you burn that Cheeto, that energy released goes into the water and raises its temperature. And then by measuring the temperature change, you can see how much energy that water absorbed, and therefore how much energy came out of the Cheeto when you burned it. And so this is what we mean this is how we calculate these values. So if we burn biomass in this way, we get 4.3 kilocalories for grams for plants, these Brussels sprouts. You get 5.5 kilocalories for caterpillar larvae. And yes, you can see he's like, wait, what? Yeah, you have to like kill caterpillar larvae and burn them to this lab, which is one of the reasons why I just don't want to do that. And then 4.74 kilocalories per gram for frass, which is basically caterpillar poop. Okay, so you get these numbers, and the lab just kind of tosses these numbers around at you without really explaining where they come from. But basically, they come from burning them in a calorimeter and seeing how much water temperature changes as a result. There is a problem with this technique, though, and that is much of the mass of an organism is water weight. And water weight is just pulled in from the roots. It's not the result of primary productivity or even secondary productivity. In other words, we're not taking carbon dioxide from the air to make water. The water is just coming in as this extra bonus thing. And so essentially, if we really want to know how much energy is actually in the biomass, those organic molecules produced from photosynthesis, we got to get rid of the water. And so before you burn the Brussels sprouts or the dead caterpillar larvae or the frass or poop, you put them in a drying oven, which is basically just an oven, and you just cook them on a low setting and you just dry them all out for a little while. And maybe you've dried herbs. Here's what fresh basil plants growing in a little herb garden might look like. And then after you dry them out, this is what they would look like. So this basil would be ready to be burned in a calorimeter so that we can see how much energy is actually in the carbohydrates there and not the added water that is in those leaves. Okay, so in parts A and B of this lab, you are going to be measuring the primary productivity in Wisconsin fast plants. These are plants that have been genetically engineered to grow really, really quickly. They go from seed to flowering in about 30 days, which is pretty cool. So you're going to use analyze data about the growth of these plants over time, and then use it to calculate net primary productivity. In part C, you're going to measure secondary productivity in caterpillars. So remember, primary productivity is the amount of energy that plants are able to capture from the sun and convert into biomass. Secondary productivity is the amount of energy that an animal, in this case a caterpillar larvae, is able to convert from the plants that it's eating. So we're going to see that flow. So here's just kind of a diagram that kind of shows what happens to that energy. So a caterpillar eats the Brussels sprouts or the plant material, and let's just suppose it gets about 200 joules worth of energy there. Well, not all of that 200 joules is converted into new caterpillar. In other words, if a caterpillar eats a gram of Brussels sprout, it won't add a gram of mass. In fact, this calculation shows it's about 33 joules of energy is actually used to make more mass. About 100 joules ends up as feces, so that just passes right on through and is defecated out. And about 67 joules are burned by cellular respiration. So basically in part C, you're going to be calculating this number right here, which they say is 33 joules. In this example, we'll see how it turns out with the Brussels sprouts. So I think with that background, you should be okay to go through. There's some mathematical critical thinking kind of stuff that has to occur, but I am greatly confident in your ability to use this information to put it all together. And if not, let us know. Good luck, everybody.